first off, where you're from and what's your position?
Yeah, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Edinburgh in the teaching area of Celtic and Scottish Studies over there, and I've been over in Nova Scotia for the last almost 3 weeks now, doing some research on new speakers and sort of new users of Gaelic over here. But yeah, I've been enjoying this.
Your research in Scotland, what's your
so my
main focus?
My doctorate investigated kind of long-term outcomes of Gaelic medium education in the first kind of among adults who received Gaelic medium education in the first decade or so that it was available in Scotland, trying to find out whether they're still speaking the language, if they're still able to, as well as their belief systems, their language ideologies and attitudes concerning Gaelic use and its place in Scotland generally. And I suppose one of the main conclusions that came out of that research was that most, clear majority of the adults I spoke to aren't using very much Gaelic in their day-to-day lives now. In terms of sort of language proficiencies, there was kind of a mix, but it was those who were raised with the language at home by at least one parent who tended to have the highest rates of sort of language retention and to maintain the highest levels of Gaelic use, especially where that went along with employment in Gaelic, and that sort of the more formal domain of work seemed to open doors to networks of Gaelic speakers where people could use the language in informal context as well. So that was the overall picture in terms of language practice, in terms of actual Gaelic use. Some of the ideologies, the linguistic ideologies that came through in the qualitative research that I conducted tended to give rationalizations for some of this limited usage. So one key theme that came through in the interviews was a sense that these adults who've been through the system and its early years didn't really necessarily understand why they had done Gaelic at school, why they were receiving their education through the minority language. They didn't necessarily understand what its relevance was to the whole of the country, or to the parts of the country where they might have grown up. Even people from some of the heartland areas in the Highlands Islands were kind of unsure about just how relevant or important Gaelic continued to be to them. So that was one of the major findings that came out there. There are other sorts of attitudes and ideologies that were coming through, particularly in terms of framing the idea of using Gaelic in terms of either being a question of opportunity or a question of choice. But I think a lot of people claimed, made the argument that they don't really have any opportunities to speak Gaelic, but then when they kind of thought about it, they were aware of opportunities existing in the communities they lived to go out of their way and find occasions where they would be able to speak Gaelic. And it was interesting to see how people sometimes actually rationalising to themselves why they weren't speaking too much Gaelic, because they didn't have opportunities, and then sometimes it would occur to them in the middle of the discussion that, well, I know this and that and the other opportunities in the city where people do come together to speak Gaelic, but actually it's just not a priority to me at the moment to be seeking out these opportunities. So it was interesting to see how some of these ideas were related.
Do you guys speak about language loyalty over there? I'm just thinking back to Ken McKinnon's writings from decades back, but is that something that would come up now, or?
It's definitely a useful concept for framing some of these questions, and it came up obviously in Nancy Dorian's research in East Sutherland Gaelic as well. Certainly you can conceptualize some of these issues in terms of language loyalty.
I know in my community there are certain families that remained more language loyal for an extra generation or so. Mm-hmm. Do you find that amongst the people that you were researching, if there was a kind of a healthy attitude within a family, that's going to make a big difference as far as language usage and usage with children.
I think to an extent, but I'm thinking particularly of one or two informants who actually had very language loyal households, who'd grown up in environments that they were surrounded by Gaelic books, Gaelic media. The parents spoke Gaelic, and it's really the most kind of the most healthy and nurturing environment from that respect, that almost Gaelic medium education wouldn't have contributed a huge amount more. But and still, some of these speakers are saying that's something I associate very much with my past. It's not something, now that I've moved away from the island that I grew up in, it's not so relevant to me here, and therefore I make the choice not to use it. So again, there's something lacking, even for the people who were fortunate enough to have that kind of background.
Okay, and you've been over here for roughly 3 weeks now?
Yeah, almost 3
Nova
weeks
Scotia.
now.
And start with the good stuff. What do you see that bids well for us for bringing this ahead in a healthy way and successfully?
I've been amazed by the kind of enthusiasm and energy surrounding the language, particularly among young people, whether they're teenagers, adolescents who are studying the language at school, or people who are sort of the post-adolescent group who've maybe only taken up study at university level, or have come back to it at that level, having previously studied it, or even people who are a little bit older than that and who are raising families through the medium of Gaelic now. And I think I've been very impressed by that, and the connection that a lot of people seem to feel in sort of personal terms, but also to the wider culture and community of the Gaelic language here, which I think is something that's maybe missing currently back in the old country. The connections between the traditional communities where the language is still spoken and the new communities which are emerging through Gaelic medium education or through different opportunities in the urban lowlands. So
do you get a feeling that over here there's a dynamic of kind of the whole package?
I think so. I think
language and culture.
I think so.
Together.
The impression I get is that efforts to kind of maintain and revitalise language here are more kind of embedded within the wider culture, and there's more of an interest in actually reclaiming that aspect of one's own cultural identity through the language, but tying that into different aspects of the culture as well, whether that's music and song, or genealogy and interest in sort of history and the kind of the history of the language and its culture in Scotland, and how that it then changed and became something new in Nova Scotia. How
important is storytelling over in Scotland? We try to incorporate things like local dialect, but also to local stories. And there's cycles of stories around characters, and we'll use those to kind of develop educational resources.
I think it certainly remains important in certain communities. I think possibly it's not so much a tradition that's really utilised in the education system to the same extent. And I think certainly there's a feeling among some kind of native speakers of Gaelic in the communities that they would like to contribute that sort of aspect of their cultural heritage, their storytelling.
And is there much mixing of native speakers within a community in the schools and with the
I think
students as part of the learning?
There is some within the communities where there's a Gaelic medium unit and an actual community that still speaks the language there. I think possibly in the cities and the more urban areas that there's not such a strong connection between the two, and that there's kind of missed opportunities in different ways.
And do you know that they place any emphasis on teaching local dialect? Like if you had children, if you had a unit in Skye, it's Skye Gaelic, but they're going to concentrate on
I don't think I could say with confidence. It may well be the case that some teachers who do have a connection to that particular locality will place an emphasis on that. But within the school system, I suppose there's so much else that teachers are responsible for, that maybe questions of dialect and idiom are kind of secondary. But then I know that there are immersion courses for adults up in Flodgary with that exact purpose in mind, to kind of teach new speakers specifics of the culture and the dialect that was and continues to be spoken in that part of Scotland.
Yeah. And we get the impression here that a lot of the teaching resources and such is kind of based in what's been called mid-Midge dialect of Gaelic. Would that be fair to say that? So if you had children learning on the Western mainland or something like that, it's not necessarily local dialect they'd be getting, but more kind of mid-Midge.
I think kind of naturally that type of variety that people term mid-Midge has kind of occurred, and it's grown and become a kind of informal standard, being, I suppose, a kind of an amalgamation of different dialects and turns of phrase that means that hopefully more people can understand, which, as I say, I think has happened fairly organically rather than being a deliberate language policy to kind of standardise. But I think, yeah, partly due to that, some of the richness is lost from some of the different dialects that have been used in different areas. But I know that there are various resources within the School of Scottish Studies in Edinburgh and elsewhere, Token and Dulachish, run from Solmarostig, that really contains just a store of wealth of all these different idioms and dialects that people can utilise. But yeah, it'd be good to see maybe more of that actually sort of employed and taken advantage of.
Swinging it back over this way, you spoke on the positive of what's going on with Gaelic over here. What would you see as negatives or challenges in that? And along those lines, would you have any recommendations to those who are working for the revitalisation of the language here?
That's a good question. I think people here who have acquired a decent level of conversational Gaelic have been quite proactive about it. They've gone after the opportunities to improve their own abilities in the language, and then to continue to put in their language skills to use. I think possibly that side of things is what needs to be encouraged at the moment, and again, sort of regenerating these households and communities where the language is kind of transmitted organically from parents to young people, and from all the generations to young people as well, rather than perhaps moving too quickly to be reliant on the education system, which I think various contexts of language revitalisation have sort of done without realising how the dynamic was emerging. So I think, yeah, by all means develop formal context for using Gaelic in the education system as a strategy to develop the language here. But I think carry on in what you've been doing to reclaim and regenerate the language in the communities, and to foster this sort of ongoing interaction between the different generations and different speakers of different dialects, and really to embrace all the dialects that continue to be spoken, even if only by one or two or three individuals in a particular community, just to capture as much of that as possible, and to foster that and nurture it.
And is there much emphasis in Scotland on getting young people to fluency who are going to become parents, and is there much emphasis on working with young parents and young families now?
I think the schools and so the Gaelic medium schools and schools with Gaelic medium classes within them often try to encourage parents to learn some language, to normalise it a bit, but I think that's not done to the degree that it really needs to be, and I'm not sure that it's officially a language policy to encourage people who are expecting children to hone up their skills so that they can pass on language at home.
One thing that we found last spring when there was a parent and babies group was that some people were starting right from ground zero, and that they didn't have any background in language, and I think for a lot of them they're very busy just being parents.
That's right.
Let alone picking
Oh,
up
for
language.
sure.
So one of the recommendations I made was, okay, well, if you've got people that have a leaning to the language, if you can get them a good foundation
That's
before
right.
the kids ever come along, and from what I've seen in Scotland, Finney MacLeod was one of the ones that would have parent and taught groups and that kind of this.
Yeah, certainly there's
initiatives like that.
There's these bottom-up initiatives to encourage that sort of thing. It's incredibly important to do that. And I think that can also be fostered and developed at the sort of official policy level as well. I know in Wales there was the TÜV scheme to encourage parents. It was essentially health visitors were trained to sort of advise parents who were able to speak some Welsh to really utilise that skill and to do whatever they could to help raise their children bilingual. And I think where that parents, where they have the skills and the abilities to do that, really need to be encouraged. And if we can develop that in Scotland, that would be a positive thing.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and we'll see you again in Nova Scotia in the not too distant future.
Yeah, we will.
More than thank you.
Well, thank you.